Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Fifth and Long podcast. Patrick DeMar, Paul the Commish K-Shack here. It is the night of July 31st. You'll be listening to this on August 1st, 2024. Kind of crazy. We're already in August. The year is absolutely flying by, and we are getting older and older. But the NFL season is almost here. We're just a little over a month away. Paul, my friend, we got some extensions to cover with quarterbacks. We've got some interesting discussions as far as fantasy football goes. And then we're also going to be talking some teams who could rise from picking at the top end of last year's draft into a playoff position this year. My man, wasting no more time. Let's get right into it. Tua Tagovailoa signs a 4-year, $212.4 million contract extension with the Miami Dolphins. $67 million guaranteed coming his way. My man.
Tua little Jerry Maguire.
No, that was Tua, 100%. In front of the Miami Dolphins fans at training camp. They gave him a standing ovation. Someone handed him a mic. That had to have been so staged.
I feel like Tua is one of those guys, like similar to Russ, like everything like that just seems awkward, corny, and staged. So not surprised.
Russell Wilson is a perfect comparison. Like Dolphins country, let's swim.
Yeah, and in terms of like their off the field acumen and like how they present themselves to the media and whatnot, they're pretty similar.
Well, either way, he's now one of the most highest paid quarterbacks in the league. The extension when he signed it was the largest 4-year extension in NFL history. Before Jordan Love got an absolute bag as well. We'll talk about him in a sec. $53.1 million average annual value for a guy who doesn't have the best rap sheet, I should say, in the playoffs or late in the regular season when it really counts in November, December, January, and so on. We sort of teased this a little bit last week when we hypothesized a Dak for Tua trade, and we got into other deals that I think were a little bit more interesting, but this was one that still kind of lingered in my head just because of both of their contract situations at the time. In your head, did Miami have any other real options in this that you would have appreciated them maybe spending more time thinking about? Or in your mind, would you have done the same thing? Forget the money side of it. Would you have extended it?
No, personally, I wouldn't have. I don't think Tua is a special player by any means. I think that he's a product of the system that he's in. But that's kind of a different question to like, what was Miami going to do? I mean, look, I've been brass before, and I said, even about the Steelers, like a team like tear it all down. I don't think Miami's going anywhere with their quarterback with Tua, but I don't know who out there is better, who they could acquire within the next year or two. And they're not going to be flat out bad enough with the talent that they have on offense and defense to get a really high pick and potentially get that franchise quarterback. So for the time being, I guess they had to do it, but I mean, I'm not a huge proponent of extending Tua. You mentioned some of his late season gaffes. Didn't look good in the playoffs last year or the year before. Or actually, I can't even remember if they made it 2 years ago, but I know that they really looked.
But he was hurt. Remember, they had
Gotcha.
I forget
the concussions. That's right.
I forget who started in the game against Buffalo, but he didn't finish the year.
Yeah, it's been a big Jekyll and Hyde with him, first half, second half. And we talked, I think, last week as well at length about how Miami, is that a part of just the environment there, just how hot it is in the beginning and how difficult it is for teams to play there early in the year. So, look, I mean, I think that he's a solid quarterback. Like, I think he is absolutely an NFL starter. I'm not trying to say that he's not, but is he a franchise-changing guy? Absolutely not, in my opinion.
So, Skylar Thompson was the name of the gentleman who started against Buffalo.
Oh, I remember this now. He actually had them competing in Buffalo, somewhat late in that game. Yeah, I remember.
Had over 200 yards. He sort of played okay. He's a Kansas State guy. I think he's still with the Dolphins as well, if I'm not mistaken. He might be the backup there. But now, if you look at the highest paid quarterbacks, Tua was third before Jordan Love signed his deal. Jordan Love, Burrow, Lawrence are all kind of sort of in the same ballpark as far as AAV goes. In terms of total value, Lawrence and Burrow had an extra year on their deal, so they actually have more money in their deal than Love does. But Tua, $212 million, $8 million less than Love. They're the same age, 26, 53.1 million AAV. It's a hair under Love as well, and $167 million total guaranteed, with nearly $100 million fully guaranteed. The deal ends in 2029. So when he turns like 30, 31, there's an opportunity for some kind of change there, maybe earlier if something crazy happens. Miami would take a cap hit if they got rid of him. But I don't know, man. Like, I've always kind of believed that if Miami could figure out a way to win the regular season essentially and get home field advantage for the playoffs, they could win a game or two. I don't necessarily believe in Tua winning a Super Bowl, and I recognize that he has his shortcomings, but at the same time, like when they were firing on all cylinders last year, they were fantastic, and he looked really awesome. He was in the MVP conversation for a while, and rightfully so. However, obviously things happened towards the end of the year. I would also say, looking back on it, look at who the Miami Dolphins had on defense going into Kansas City in that absolute ice bowl, which we've brought up time and time again. I think that there is a world where he can get them into some big games, AFC championships, maybe a Super Bowl. I just don't know if he can win it. And part of our conversation is going to be that Miami isn't really paying him for performance until now. They're paying him, investing in what he could bring them in the future, essentially, in their eyes.
Yeah. I just look at it kind of in this light. Like, when's his situation, at least offensively, going to get any better? He's got arguably one of, if not the best receiving duos in football. He's got a head coach who's extremely offensive minded. They got a great scheme there. They're extremely pass happy. Like, I mean, the situation's not going to get any better than it has been the past couple of years. And Tyreek doesn't look like he's slowing down at all. But I mean, the guy's 30 years old. It's not like he's young per se. Yeah. Like, eventually Father Time will catch up to him as well. And like, when that happens, that might be when we're in the middle of Tua's deal. You know, what do things look like when he doesn't have that all-pro wide receiver firing at that level? So, like I said, I think that, yeah, I guess they kind of had to do it. And you're not wrong. Like, I mean, I still think that this is a team that's at least going to be a playoff contender. And I mean, could they win it? Sure. If they get home field and they got the, opposition coming to Miami. But like you said, I don't see a major deep run in the Dolphins' future. And I don't see Tua being like the catalyst for it,
I think there's a world where they could win the AFC East this year and maybe get a top 2 seed. Because if you look at the other divisions, like the South, besides the Texans, nobody's screaming 10 plus wins. And even the Texans, I think their win total is at 9.5 per Vegas, if I'm not mistaken. And then the AFC North is going to be an absolute bloodbath. Like, you might have a couple teams get more than 10 wins, but those teams are going to beat up on each other. I don't think you're going to have another team going 13 plus wins out of there. If Miami can get to 12, 13 wins somehow in that division, they could come up with the number 2 seed. And then maybe, they could turn something into it. But again, they're going to need to stay healthy. They're really thin on defense, really thin on O-line as well. It's going to be an interesting year with them, considering the new investment for Tua. Jordan Love, we sort of teased. 4 years, $220 million. Thank you, sir. Show him the money as well. Just talking about Jerry Maguire. I love that movie, man. I'm going to rewatch that tonight. Great movie.
It's a good one to watch this time of year for sure.
Good Tom Cruise flick.
He's got a lot of them, not just that one.
Jordan Love joins Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow as the highest paid quarterback in the league per AAV. This is a record in terms of signing bonus, $75 million and $155 million in full guarantees. It's crazy, man. This guy has only had a year of starters experience, but he was pretty damn good. And this is sort of like doubling down for Green Bay after trading up to go and get him in the first round in 2020 while having Aaron Rodgers as quarterback. Now going ahead and making him one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league, joint highest, however you want to say it. They are voicing their absolute trust in his abilities, his progression, and his ability to win there in a division that's got plenty of talent in it. That's going to be a gauntlet in and of itself. Never mind the AFC North. The NFC North is going to be crazy this year too, especially if the Bears are in the mix and Caleb Williams can turn them into a playoff caliber team. Paul, you're a big Jordan Love proprietor. He's one of your favorites. I think I've heard you say a couple of times you could see him as one of those guys that could challenge Mahomes in the future or has a good chance to. What was your immediate thought about this extension when you saw the news?
So this one I was much more favorable with. I mean, I still think like there's a degree where, I mean, we've only seen one really good season out of Jordan Love. And I mean, it seems in the NFL, that's really kind of all it's taken to get a major contract. So I wasn't surprised by any means. And certainly with the comments that we've heard over the past couple of weeks that Love wasn't practicing until he had gotten this deal, I'm not shocked at all that something came shortly thereafter. But I am certainly more confident that he's going to live up to this deal than a guy like Tua, or even some of the other quarterbacks that have been recently extended. You go back to like Lawrence, Hurts per se, even. So I'm confident here. And I think that also you look at Green Bay, like we've talked about plenty of times, and they're super young. So they don't need to pay some of their wide receivers. Not the case for Miami. Waddle just got paid. You know, Tyreek's on a bigger deal. They don't need to pay some of their receivers, at least quite yet, I should say. So it's a little bit more affordable for Green Bay, I think, in that sense. And I think Jordan Love, I like the talent a little bit more there. I think that he propelled the Packers forward more as opposed to the Dolphins kind of took Tua along. I don't want to say they carried Tua, but Tua didn't do as much. He wasn't as much of a catalyst for the Dolphins, I think, as Love was for the Packers. So hats off to Jordan Love. I do think that he is a guy that could challenge Mahomes. I wouldn't be surprised if Green Bay's, threatening for a Super Bowl this year. So it is a gauntlet of a division, but one of the reasons that people say that is an unproven rookie quarterback, and I think Jordan Love has the brightest future out of anybody who's proven, I guess, in that division. You could say you could say that Love's potential Caleb Williams' potential is higher than Love's, but I'll take Love right now because we have a little bit more of an NFL track record.
Absolute Sam Darnold slander right there, man. Can't stand it.
I gotta say this. I mean, you get the camp videos a lot this time of year, both positively and negative. Dude, I have seen only dimes from Sam Darnold.
Weren't we just talking last week about how you don't want to trust those things until you see?
I don't, and I'm not saying I do. I'm just trying to feed your fire here a little bit with the Darnold love.
We need somebody to make an account where they just hold both of Paul and I's feet to the fire, and whenever we contradict ourselves, they hold us accountable in some way, shape, or fashion. I don't know what that would.
I'm just gonna say your feet are gonna get held to the fire way worse on that one than mine.
Hey man, I have my crazy fair share of takes, but I have some that land too. So.
Oh yeah, I mean we both do. I'm not saying that I don't have a crazy take. I'm not saying I've never walked back to take before myself, so don't worry about it. Before
I move on, you mentioned the potential skill position players in Green Bay. And that was sort of part of the dialogue with Miami too. Like the OBJ signing, I actually really liked, and I think brings some more depth to their room. Like Braxton Berrios isn't going to be their wide receiver 3 anymore. That's awesome. He's actually pretty decent, but that's a guy who's made big plays in big games, and that matters for a team like that. I think they also have a potential budding superstar, Devon Achane. If they can incorporate him in the offense even more, instead of just stumbling upon him when Mostert got injured midway through last year, they could have an even more impressive and opportunistic offense. That could be like lightning striking at any moment with that team. You could see multiple 50-point games during the course of the year, depending on who they play. I think they have a pretty easy schedule in the early goings of the year. It's going to get tougher at the end of the year. It's kind of built that way for some teams in the mix this year. The NFL is doing a crazy job scheduling for some teams, which we're going to have to talk about at some point on the pod here. The Packers, though, Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs. I mean, there's several other guys as well. Plus, you bring in Josh Jacobs, too. They have an assortment of weapons and a bunch of young guys who are hungry for more opportunities. I am very excited to see what those guys like Jaden Reed as well could do. Great tight ends there too. And I mean,
Luke Musgrave could really take off this year. He was a rookie tight end last year. I expect him to take a step forward there as well.
Yeah, if they get him involved in the offense as well, he could be stud, man. I am really excited to see what could happen offensively in Green Bay this year. Overall, it sounds like you are thumbs down Tua, thumbs up Jordan Love. I'm somewhere in the middle on Tua, and I'm definitely up on Jordan Love as well.
Yeah, but I mean, I still do at least with Tua. I at least acknowledge. I mean, what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
You know, so I can see it in that sense. But I like the Love deal a lot more.
The only other thing you could have done really at this point is like go standoff mode with the Cowboys and just wait and see if both those quarterbacks go to free agency. Maybe sign Dak
I guess, yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if that's a risk you want to take, you know?
I guess I should rephrase. Yeah, you can do that. And honestly, I mean, that could, in essence, like start perpetuating a rebuild, so to speak. I don't know if people want to use that word or Miami's certainly not bad enough to go into a rebuild yet. But like, I think at least for the next couple of years, they'd be worse off. I think, long term,
I think there's a greater question with them. It's more like if you have Tyreek Hill, if you traded for him, that is a move that you can't really let go to waste. You have to try to you have to stay along that track. You can't, you're already going full speed ahead down the hill. The brakes from the train are not working anymore. Like you're either going to make that jump on the other side of the canyon or you're not at this point.
Yeah.
Especially giving the money to it too.
Yeah. You commit to Jalen Waddle as well. Like, I mean, the pieces are there.
Not to reference Back to the Future 3, but that was where my head was at with that reference.
Yeah. another great movie. I'm Back to the Future 3 is definitely the worst of the trio, but the Back to the Future series.
I don't know. I disagree. I think the second one is my least favorite.
I like the second one. I think it goes in order, like first, second, third. I think that's the order for me in terms of how much I like them.
Yeah. Okay, Marty. DJ Moore extension. The Bears locking up their stud wide receiver. 4 years, $110 million extension, $82.5 million guaranteed, thereabouts. It's the largest contract in franchise history. And Moore is now the 7th highest paid wide receiver in the league. He was a stud in fantasy last year too. And there were times where he and Fields seemed like they had a really good connection when Fields had his deep ball rhythm sort of going. Like Moore was the big play factor on the other end of Justin Fields at times. If Williams can be more consistent at quarterback, he could be a force there. Never mind the other guys they've added in that wide receiver room as well.
Yeah, I mean, DJ Moore's on, he's the younger guy too compared to Keenan Allen. Obviously, Rome Odunze, the youngest of that potential three-headed monster we're talking about out there in Chicago, but makes more sense. You're going to commit to DJ Moore, long-term, obviously, and that's the relationship. DJ Moore is the guy I think that they really want to help mentor and bring Caleb Williams along. We've seen it with a lot of these young quarterbacks, that they have some receiver that they can really rely on. Guy I think about last year that was helping a really young quarterback. People maybe squawk at this comparison, but I felt like DeAndre Hopkins, really nice mentor for Will Levis last year, help him come along. Not quite the same, I guess you could say, because Caleb Williams is more developed, more natural talent than Levis, but I could see a similar type relationship. Williams is just walking into a phenomenal situation here. And in Chicago, you got to give their front office a lot of credit. They've built a really good team now. And they're going to have a really good team, you would figure, for, the years to come. This should be a decent sized window for them to compete in, assuming that Caleb Williams is going to be that guy. You're going to have Odunze on his rookie deal, Williams on the rookie deal as well, and DJ Moore now for a 4-year extension. So hats off to them. They're going to have a tough division. We've already mentioned that plenty of times, but I don't know if this year per se is the year for Chicago. Just because Williams is a rookie, let's not forget, just because he's maybe one of the best quarterback prospects of
There's some coaching questions there too.
Yeah, and you could say coaching questions. And I mean, just reality, 2 teams in their division were in the playoffs and won playoff games last year. There's an element of experience that's on the side of Detroit and Green Bay. But I think that we're going to see Chicago be a legitimate contender, within the next 3 to 4 years, somewhere in that run.
Cole Kmet, Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, DeAndre Swift, and then you could also have Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson getting carries in the mix too. Gerald Everett is a tight end option. He was the starter in LA last year. It's not a bad group at all. And their defense really turned up the heat.
Group, yeah.
Yeah, their defense really turned up the heat in the second half of last year as well. A lot of people are high on the Bears. I mean, they were frisky last year as well, and they had their warts. So we'll have to see how they improve. That's going to be part of our next conversation. Finishing up on DJ Moore, third most guaranteed money behind Justin Jefferson and AJ Brown as far as wide receivers go. And it lines up with a timeline for the Caleb Williams extension as well. You mentioned the mentorship part. This is a guy who gets rave reviews in the clubhouse. He's played every game over the last 3 seasons. He's only 27. There's an aspect of maturity there. You've seen what he does on the field as well. This is, for all intents and purposes, the guy for Caleb Williams right now. Keenan Allen could be a great safety blanket, and the pressure is so off from Odunze that he can sort of flourish, or maybe he has more of Jackson Smith-Njigba type rookie season where he's a little bit on the back burner to start the year, but he mixes in his great productive games as well. Any final thoughts on DJ Moore?
No, I think that's a great comp for Odunze. I do kind of see him having a JSN type year this year. And that's not to underscore him or say that he won't be as much of a factor. It's just going to be tough to feed all those mouths in that receiving core. But with Caleb Williams, he's going to get single coverage on these guys. You can't afford to double team anybody. You mentioned Kmet as well. It's going to be massive for a young quarterback. He won't have to lock in on that one talent. So it'll be interesting. I think that as many eyes as anybody's will be on Chicago this upcoming year, and my eyes definitely be on them as well. Fantasy wise, of course, factoring that in.
So Keenan Allen's deal is actually up at the end of this season. So he is an unrestricted free agent going into the 2025 year. This very well could be a one and done type year for him too.
Yeah,
he's kind of in.
It will be. Yeah. He's a guy who's well into his 30s already. I mean, this is that's why when everybody was like freaking out and thought that it would what, because I think a 4th round pick was all Chicago gave up to get him, and everybody's like,
bro, remember he was on pace to potentially break the single season reception record last year at one point.
I do. I remember we talked about that, but and I thought that he probably warranted more than a 4th round pick per se as well, but that's why the return for him to LA wasn't that crazy, because we just passed the MLB trade deadline, right? So you've heard the term rental and control a lot. Like Keenan Allen, you're basically renting him for just this 1 year. So and so that's why the return in a draft pick capital wasn't that crazy for him. So but nonetheless, that's what I was talking about. You're built to kind of go all in this year, but you're not selling the farm, so to speak. I'm really in baseball mode right now, but it's a great spot to be in if you're a fan of the Chicago Bears.
We've got to cover our next topic here. Moving on to some NFL experimentation. That's a little murky as far as an intro, but the NFL is going to test Hawkeye, Major League Baseball system for balls and strikes for line to gain in some preseason games. So instead of using the chain gang, they're going to double down on their electronic down system. I don't know if you're going to see more lines on the screen or less, but they're going to use sort of some kind of electronic placement system. I'm interested to see how it works. We haven't really seen, we've heard all this stuff related to Major League Baseball in terms of experimenting with automatic balls and strikes with, all kinds of things. I remember they experimented with the bigger bases before they brought them in, with the pitch clock and that sort of thing. And you don't typically see leagues experiment with stuff like this and not end up using it. So I don't know how the NFL feels about it exactly. I know that the NFL says that they have high standards and they don't want to miss things. Sometimes we see officials misplace a spot when a guy comes down, and you don't want to have any room for error when there's legal gambling, there's money on the line, right? All these kind of things. It makes sense. It's a step forward in terms of technology, but it's a little weird at the same time, right? Like, I kind of like seeing the chain gangs out there. I feel like it's a part of football. Like, you don't get that anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I get that sentimental value. Actually, I do. As crazy as that does seem, I like that's how it's always been. But in the same sense, when we do have the technology that we do these days, and like, I mean, we've got all these, camera angles, super slow-mos, everything on replays. We do everything we possibly can to make sure that that's 100% accurate. And then it's like the same attention to detail really isn't paid to spotting the ball. Maybe it is in the final 2 minutes of a game or like on the final drive of a half. But really, I mean, think about how many times, this is the thing that's always stood out to me. Think of how many times throughout the course of the game where you literally probably just by like a quarter of a yard, the ball spot is off, whether because you don't go and back review exactly where the guy's knee went down every time, or if the ref is spotting the ball in the exact right spot. Well, that can add up over the course of a game. That can get a team an extra first down, a couple first downs maybe on a drive, and lead to points. But we only kind of really review things like that to that nth degree in the final couple minutes of either the half or the game itself. So as much I would say as like, can we get the actual spot right down to its like most accurate and finite millimeter per se? Like, how is the NFL going to attack making sure it's accurate throughout the whole game? And I think that that's as big of a deal as it is getting the spot right. So maybe this will do that. We'll see. I'm interested to see how it works as well. I mean, it's the one thing that's still in the dark ages, I guess, for the NFL, the chain game. But that they'll still definitely have the guys on the chain. Like, they'll just be there, standing there. Not that it'll be like a backup. You know what I'm saying? Like, whenever like the technology goes down, because it seems like there's still glitches and all this stuff at some point, one way or the other. They'll still have the guys just sitting on the chain, and basically, I think those guys will be collecting a paycheck for doing nothing.
Moving on to, well, we mentioned the NFL preseason. NFL preseason starts tomorrow or tonight if you're listening to this on Thursday, August 1st. 8 p.m., Hall of Fame game, Texans and the Bears kicking off. You won't see C.J. Stroud or Caleb Williams, but you'll see Tyson Bagent, however you say it. Teabag? I'm down for Teabag. Yeah. Come on, man.
Remember him from last year? One of your backup quarterback love stories or whatever you want to call it.
I want to see him throwing 35-yard sort of bombs to Rome Odunze.
I like Tyson Bagent too, so I can't just put that love all on you, but it'll be interesting. Do you know if Caleb Williams is supposed to play at all in this game?
No, he's not going to.
Okay,
there was actually a discussion on that where he sort of said, like, I want to play. I think it's important to get these reps. I don't want to like miss out on these opportunities to figure out what it's like to see these shell coverages and, sort of reacting to defenses changing on the fly. But there's money involved. It's an investment. Like, you don't really see a guaranteed starter get a lot of preseason reps nowadays for any team. So there's no reason for them to risk it with Caleb by any means. And the same for Stroud, honestly.
And I don't really know like how much you're going to learn in a preseason game. Yes, is it real NFL action? Will you probably pick something up? Sure. But like, it's a very vanilla type coverage. Like, teams are not going to be showing anything crazy package wise, offensively or defensively. That, the time for that happens in the regular season. So I get like Caleb Williams' eagerness to get out there and just get into real NFL action. But I don't think that he's going to pick up as much as he would think just based on, an extra preseason game.
Did you see the quote where Bagent was asked by a media member, like, something about his stance with on the depth chart, basically, like whether he was worried about them bringing in somebody to maybe fight for that spot? And his response was something along the lines of, I can't find the press conference clip right now, but it was something along the lines of like, no, man, I've been too busy grinding my absolute face off this offseason.
No, I haven't seen that, but that sounds similar to his response when somebody had asked him last year when he had finally gotten his chance to start. They're like, "What would you be doing if you weren't an NFL quarterback or if you didn't get this opportunity?" He goes, "Honestly, dude, I just probably would be like a CrossFit warrior or something like that." I'm paraphrasing, but so that sounds like a very similar answer. So he seems like somewhat of a funny guy. I'm sure he's a good locker room guy for sure.
I heard in a podcast that I was listening to, I think it was the Athletic Football Show, talking about this workout that he does where he does burpee broad jumps for a mile. Like he just interchanges a burpee and then a broad jump, and he does it for a mile and he times himself. And the fastest he's done it is like an hour and 7 minutes or something like that. And
that's insane.
It's nuts. And like the conversation, the podcast was along the lines of like, a personal fitness trainer will probably say like that really does nothing like for you, but it's not going to hurt you either. It's just like a dumb like mental toughness exercise essentially. And whatever you want to say about him as a quarterback, regardless of how many snaps he's going to take this year for the Bears, hey, you never know what could happen. We saw plenty of injuries last year. Not that I want to see Caleb Williams get hurt. Dude grinds his absolute face off.
Yeah, I mean, like I've said it a million times, you just need to have confidence that your backup quarterback can hold his own if the starter goes down and maybe steal you a couple wins while the starter's out. So I think Bajan could potentially be a guy who could do that for him. But you're right. Like, let's not have that discussion here on August 1st about Caleb Williams already going down before the man's even stepped foot on an NFL field.
Also, we've said his name 3 different ways. We
believe it's Bajan, but I don't know. Yeah, that's what happens when you're a backup quarterback that came from a D2 school. Okay, like people are gonna get your name wrong, and just don't get offended by it.
Oh my gosh, do you remember what school he was?
I was in Colorado, I want to say. I think, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it.
I don't remember exactly.
I'm looking up the wrong school. That's it. Shepherd University.
Shepherd. Okay.
You don't know their mascot, do you?
No. That one you got me.
The Rams.
The Rams. Okay.
If anybody ever asks in the future.
Yeah. Shepherd University Rams.
Speaking of the Hall of Fame game, the Hall of Fame enshrinement ceremony is this Saturday. 5 players of this era are going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Dwight Freeney, Julius Peppers, Patrick Willis, Devin Hester, and Andre Johnson. Nuts, man. Is Andre Johnson the first Houston Texan to make the Hall of Fame?
You know what? I haven't heard that, but I would think that he might be. The franchise hasn't been around that long. Maybe it's possible somebody's gone in like jointly. Somebody who played for the Texans and maybe had a longer career with somebody else could be in, but I can't think of anybody.
Technically, Ed Reed played for the Texans at one point.
There you go. Yeah, Ed Reed doesn't count. Ed Reed's in as a Raven. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I think it's just him and Andre Johnson, and Ed Reed is in as a Raven. Like, I didn't even know he played with the Texans. He played for them for part of his last season, where he started with them and then he ended up with the Jets.
Wow.
Yeah.
Keep that in the mind for Immaculate Grid. I didn't remember that.
Yeah, that's something to keep in your pocket for sure. Certainly JJ Watt will go in there in a few years.
Yep.
I don't really know if anybody else comes to mind off the top of my head. Like DeAndre Hopkins at one point, probably.
DeAndre Hopkins is tracking towards there. You wonder, he does have a little bit of a PED asterisk on, at least on his resume. Not saying that holds the same weight in football.
Come on. Ray Lewis allegedly stabbed somebody. I feel like
I know. I'm saying I don't know. I don't think it holds the same weight in NFL as it does in in the MLB, but we'll see. Yeah. I mean, when you don't have a franchise that's been around that long, there's fewer to pick from. I think that there's maybe a handful of young guys on the team now that are off to good starts, but by no means am I going to just look at a nice young quarterback 1 year into his NFL career and start saying he's Hall of Fame bound. So JJ Watt, we'll probably keep it at that for now before any of us says anything else stupid and gets our feet held to the fire even more.
We did talk about the kickoff rules changing this year last episode. We talked about it a couple times on the show, and I think it's no mistake that Devin Hester is going into the Hall of Fame the same year that they're revamping kickoffs. Yeah, I'm really excited we talked about it last week, but I'm going to watch the game anyways tomorrow night, but I'm going to be paying the most attention to the kickoffs and how those go. I'm really excited to see if there are any sort of trick plays that we see right off the bat with those. Cause I think we could genuinely, I think we could. There's going to be a lot of experimentation with those, I think, in preseason because
do you think so, or do you think teams will be trying to keep close to the vest? I think they're going to keep close to the vest. I think it's going to be kind of vanilla in the preseason, and then they're going to really break things out in the regular season. Wouldn't you think?
I think it's more like the plays themselves are going to be so chaotic that just by playing it normally,
now that I could see, yeah,
it's going to feel like all out chaos.
Yeah, you don't even know what normal is yet for it. Yeah,
exactly. That's my exact point. That's what I'm excited the most for. I think. I'm down to see T-Bag throw some bombs too. We'll see who else gets some playing time. Anything else you want to hit on Hall of Fame? Any nuggets on these players here that begs you to tip your cap to them specifically, Mr.
No,
Commish?
I mean they're all they're all great players in their own right. It makes me feel a little bit old. I guess that's the only other thing I'll say. Like, I remember all of these guys playing, I mean, that's been the case, for a couple years now. But
these guys, the memories are fresher though for you.
Yeah, there's more fresh memories and I have more of them, like as of a couple years ago, it was still guys that I only saw the very tail end of their careers. And now, I remember Dwight Freeney wrecking havoc for those early 2000s Colts teams, like Julius Peppers.
Big adversary of Brady, honestly.
I've got like my own memories of these guys playing, you know what I'm saying? And so that's starting to hit home more and more each year now, as not just in football, but in any sport as well.
I'm looking up now who could be up for the Hall of Fame next year. 2025 eligible members to the NFL Hall of Fame. How about Luke Kuechly? Guaranteed.
Wow.
Guaranteed. Yeah, that's nuts. I guarantee you. Well, he also had.
I don't know if he played long enough, dude. I don't know if he played long enough.
He's got the best, according to this website I'm looking at. He's got the best quote unquote legend score. He could go in unanimously, supposedly.
Oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong. I thought his career, from what I remember, I thought his career was cut a little bit short. But
Eli Manning.
No.
Adam Vinatieri. No, you said no to Eli. I think he gets in.
I think he will, but
he beat Brady twice in the Super Bowl. He has to.
I don't know if Eli's a Hall of Famer per se, but
I know what you're
saying.
He
probably will get in. Not first ballot though. I don't think he's first ballot.
I know what you're saying. Earl Thomas is on there. Joe Staley, Marshawn Lynch, interesting. Ryan Khalil, Darren Sproles, Clay Matthews III, Terrell Suggs, Keeb Talib, Demaryius Thomas, Vernon Davis, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, the man with more kids than anybody else.
I don't know. Tyreek Hill's coming for him now.
He is. He's certainly challenging. That's for
surprised we went through a Miami Dolphins segment early in the podcast. We didn't bring up Tyreek Hill's new baby mama.
Dude, Tyreek Hill is just going to own his own team of his own kids someday.
They might. They're going to be some fast kids. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's going to be nuts. Speed University, Tyreek Hill.
Yeah.
All right, we got to move on to our next segment. Let's take a break first. We'll come back and then we'll do this. All right, coming back from the break. Paul, did you know that since 2015, the NFL has had at least one team who picked in the top 8 of the draft the previous season make the playoffs the next year?
I did, but only because you told me before the episode. I did not know this off the top of my head. It was a very interesting stat when you brought it up. I think it speaks to, if I could give a brief opinion on it, I think it speaks to the fact that, I think for one, the college game is getting closer to the NFL game, where these guys are more well prepared to jump right into the NFL. And so those first round picks can make so much more of an impact now than I think that they used to. So I think it speaks to that as much as anything. And also, especially when you're drafting an elite quarterback, which a lot of teams obviously in the top 8 are doing, and how much a quarterback affects the game, I'm not too surprised that it goes hand to hand with big turnarounds for franchises.
So we're going to go through the history of this really quickly and sort of go through the teams and who they are. And then we'll talk about the teams who picked in the top 8 of this year's draft, the 2024 draft, and who potentially could fit into this category for the next season, or if maybe the streak will end. Maybe Who knows? 2015, the Commanders, then Washington Redskins, draft Brandon Scherf, 5th overall, improved from 4-12 to 9-7. This was still when there was 16 games instead of 17 games. They win the division title, but lose to Green Bay in the wild card round. The next year, the Cowboys draft Zeke, 4th overall, out of Ohio State after Ohio State wins the Natty. They improved from 4-12 to 13-3. However, they also had Dak there, who had that incredible rookie season as quarterback. So I think that's like a tandem duo. You get both those guys at the same time. That's just really an incredible job from that front office. I think, wasn't Leighton Vander Esch in that class as well at the time? And I know he was a big player for a while too.
Vander Esch was a solid player for them at middle linebacker, but I can't remember what year he's drafted or if it was that one.
He was drafted, his rookie year was 2018, so it was a couple years later. My apologies. 2017, the Jaguars draft Leonard Fournette, 4th overall. They improved from 3-13 to 10-6. They made a run to the AFC Championship game, lose to my New England Patriots in Foxborough. Never going to forget that Stephon Gilmore outstretched diving tip pass to save the game and seal the win. Great year for the Jaguars. RIP Blake Bortles. He's still alive, but his career in the NFL is not. 2018, the Bears.
Yeah, wait, real quick. We talked about T-Bag earlier and what he would be doing if he wasn't in the NFL. Have you seen Blake Bortles' interview asked what he would be doing if he wasn't in the NFL or didn't go to the NFL when he did?
Didn't he say he would be probably working like construction or something?
Yes, you got half of it. But the funnier part and what I was alluding to is he said he'd probably be working construction and ripping cigs. So, sometimes you forget that these are just normal dudes that happen to play football.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. I wonder
he might be ripping cigs now.
Yeah, I wonder what his preference is as far as cigs go. He doesn't really strike me as Marlboro Red guy. He's kind of like something like kind of out there off the wall.
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly
I'm not really well versed. Yeah, I wouldn't really know.
I don't know all the brands off the top of my head, but yeah, we'll see maybe.
Me neither. 2018, the Bears draft Roquan Smith, 8th overall. They improved from 5-11 to 12-4. They win the NFC North. So these are 4 straight division winners. Actually, all these teams won their division the year after. So it's not just half of them. It's every single one of these teams won the division the year after. That Bears team lost to the Eagles in the famous double doink wildcard game. I will never forget that game. That was a crazy game to watch, the end there. 2019, the Niners go all the way to the Super Bowl after drafting Nick Bosa 2nd overall. They lose to the Chiefs. 2020, the Commanders draft Chase Young 2nd overall. They go from 3-13 to 7-9, but they still win the NFC East. That was the terrible NFC East year. They ended up beating Tampa Bay in the wild card round. I think they lost they lost to Tampa Bay in the wild card round. So they lost in the first round of the playoffs. My apologies. 2021, the Bengals draft Jamar Chase 5th overall. They end up making a run to the Super Bowl as well that season after winning just 4 games the year before. They had 1 tie in there as well. The Jags in 2022, they picked 1st overall after didn't they go winless in 2021, the Urban Meyer year?
No.
Did they won one game?
Jags didn't go winless. They only won 1 or 2, but they did get a win.
They went from 3-14 to 9-8. My apologies. They ended up making it to the divisional round. They lost to the Chiefs in that game. And then just last year, the Houston Texans win the AFC South. They end up losing to the Ravens in the divisional round, but they got a playoff win. They beat the Browns at home in a wild card game. They went from 13-1 to 10-7. Pretty good track record with all these teams. If you would say there's any maybe accident among them, that Commanders team in 2020 that was 7-9 certainly stands out. But otherwise, these teams were all pretty decent, like won their divisions. Couple of teams that played for a Super Bowl in there as well. So you would have to think that some of these teams weren't that far off. Remember that Bengals team, Joe Burrow did not play his rookie year. He had an injury where he wasn't able to play for most of the season. So in reality, they got Chase and Burrow in the same year. That's a little bit of an asterisk as well. We talked about Dak and Zeke in 2016 too. Were there any other teams from this list that like really stood out to you just off the top of your head? Obviously the Texans are the most recent, but top to bottom, Paul, which team in your memory like really stuck when I mentioned it.
I mean, you look back on that Cowboys team that that wasn't as fresh in my head, just given the fact that that's 2016, but that was a massive turnaround. And that was a elite team. I do remember in 2016. I remember a game late in the regular season against my Steelers where they were battling it out, going back and forth, and Dak got the ball last and the Cowboys won that game. So, I mean, that was like my first moment where I was like, damn, this Dak Prescott guy, like, he's a pretty damn good quarterback. So that was one of the memories that initially popped into my head. And then it's, I mean, with the Texans, you're right, like how close that was. I mean, that's directly related to their quarterback and, you know, what I just talked about. So I'd say those two stood out most in my head. But yeah, that 2016 Cowboys team, man, that team was really good. And if I remember correctly, Dak did not start the year with that team. I believe Tony Romo did, and Dak took over. I don't think Tony was starting that long, but I don't believe Prescott started from week 1. I could be wrong about that.
I'm looking it up now. I looked up that Niners team that made the Super Bowl as well. I thought maybe that was Shanahan's first year, but that was his third year with them. They had losing records the 2 previous years. Jimmy G was the quarterback that got them to the Super Bowl as well. Was that the year they traded for CMC too? Didn't they bring in CMC that year? No.
CMC, they traded for him in 2022.
That's right. Dak played in all 16 games in 2000.
Oh, okay. I was wrong. Maybe it was just a little bit of a controversy in the preseason.
Potentially. I don't really remember, but I guess I do remember Romo kind of being on that team. However, now we got to try to predict which team who drafted in the top 8 from last year will make it to the playoffs this year, or better yet, win their division. Commish. Those teams from the number 1 pick to the 8th, the Chicago Bears, the Washington Commanders, New England Patriots, the Arizona Cardinals, the Los Angeles Chargers, the New York Football Giants, the Tennessee Titans, and the Atlanta Falcons. The team with the best odds to make the playoffs on this list, the Atlanta Falcons, minus 192 on FanDuel, minus 215 on DraftKings. The team with the worst odds to make the playoffs from this list, my New England Patriots, plus 920 on FanDuel, plus 900 on DraftKings. It's looking bleak in Foxborough, but I'm excited for what this year's team could bring. Certainly the Bears and Falcons are like the easy kind of low-hanging fruit here, and maybe the Chargers too. Do you think you could poke holes in any of those teams for being a sure bet to make the playoffs?
Oh, well, yeah, no one's a sure bet. I mean, take a look at the Bears. We've already talked about them. Okay,
the Bears and Falcons are favored at least.
I know they are, but we'll talk about the Bears at first. Caleb Williams, yes, potentially generational, potentially one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I get it. He's still a rookie, okay? Rookie status applies to everybody, especially at the quarterback position. So there will be mistakes there. The division's really tough. Obviously, Green Bay and Detroit, you would think, have a leg up already. It's going to be tough to make the playoffs if you're the 3rd best team in your division. So I would just say that's my hole poking per se at Chicago. Atlanta, Kirk Cousins, how healthy, how effective is he? Very good quarterback. How effective is he without Justin Jefferson? How much of his success was attributed to that? And does he look like the same guy he did in Minnesota? I think that it's a fair question mark. Now, at least for them, they've got a much weaker division, arguably the weakest division in football, that is boding well for them. And was the Chargers the other team you brought up?
Yeah,
they have the
Chargers.
Closest odds. For them, I think it's just lack of weapons around Justin Herbert right now. You don't have Keenan Allen anymore. Austin Eckler had lost a step last year and now is in Washington. So you're relying on either Quentin Johnston to take a step forward as the 2nd-year man, and he struggled mightily last year as a rookie, or you're asking Ladd McConkey to really step up as a rookie wide receiver. Now, it can be done. We've seen rookie receivers in recent years, guys like Jefferson, Jamar Chase, take off. I don't know that McConkey is quite of that talent, but I was saying, the college game is preparing you for the NFL now more and better than it has before. So it's possible, but that's the clear hole to poke there with LA.
So one thing I will say about those 3 teams, per sharpfootballanalysis.com, they ranked every team's schedule by projected win totals of their opponents. And they have the Falcons, Chargers, and Bears as the 3 easiest schedules in that order across the league. So there is maybe like something to say if they're just playing bad teams and they could reap the benefits of that. I think that really comes down to coaching. Like, I think that's where the Chargers could maybe get an advantage if Harbaugh can be Harbaugh and, figure out a way to grind out some wins. I don't think it'll necessarily be pretty, but that's sort of his style anyways. The Falcons, it's like they just improved so much on their quarterback. Like the Bears, you could make an argument that Fields had just as many games where he helped them win as he helped them lose. Like very much so hot and cold, streaky, had his great moments, had his bad ones. Sure. Whereas the Falcons, their quarterbacks were just bad. Like game 1 through the last game of the year, they didn't have good moments at all. Like both those guys, Heineke and Desmond Ridder, were horrendous. And Cousins, I could see them really bringing a huge improvement to where they could win like 10 games and end up winning their division as well. That's the low-hanging fruit. They have the best odds as well here. With the other teams on this list, Commanders, Patriots, we don't have to talk about the Patriots here.
They're not going to be my pick, so yeah.
They wouldn't really be mine either, honestly. I really love Drake May, and I think that 2-3 years from now, maybe we're talking about the Patriots differently, but not this year. Not this year. And if we are, I'll be stoked come November, but I doubt it. Commanders, Cardinals, Giants, Titans. From those teams, all kind of similar odds to make the playoffs in that like plus 300-ish range on FanDuel. Are any of those teams sort of screaming to you as a potential top 8 playoffs team?
I'll give you an out there one. I'll take Tennessee here.
That's where I thought you were going to go.
I think that they're going to have a tough division, no doubt. But I think that is the biggest drawback. I think the talent is there on this team. You have Calvin Ridley, you have DeAndre Hopkins. Will Levis showed me stuff, albeit in flashes and with inconsistencies last year. I think he takes a leap forward. I think that this team has good players on it. You bring in Tony Pollard as well. Tajay Spears is a nice guy to complement him. Like, there are good players on this offense. 6-11 can be improved by a handful of games. I'm not saying that this team is going to win the division, but if you tell me that this team could go like 9-8, 10-7 and sneak in as that 7 seed, I'd believe it. I think that it will be partly dependent upon what do we get from Anthony Richardson in the Indianapolis Colts. I think that they're the biggest wild card in that division. We just don't know if Richardson's going to stay healthy and what he's going to look like exactly when he gets back. Does Trevor Lawrence look more like he did last year, or does he look like the guy from 2 years ago? I think that there's just a big unknown with Jacksonville and Indianapolis about how good they could be. And I think that Tennessee could slide right in there if those teams are not quite performing to expectations. So will things need to break their way? Sure. Like, it's by no means a shoe-in. I get why it's plus 360 on FanDuel for them to just make it. But I would take a flyer on Tennessee out of the bottom half of this list for sure.
I see where you're coming from with that, but I think they play in a really tough division as well. And I understand what you're saying about Indianapolis too. Like, there's some question marks there, not just about what you'll see from Anthony Richardson, but if it is the Anthony Richardson we saw for 4 games, how healthy is he going to be? Are we going to get 4 games again, or are we going to get 4 times that?
Does he need to play? The other thing with Richardson, sorry to interrupt you, does he need to play at like the style of football that he played for the 4 or 5 games to be effective? Because, like, does this guy need to be like trucking people and running the ball all the time to be effective? If he does, he's just going to be more prone to injury. That's the other thing you need to consider.
No, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because it is a big part of it as well. Like, Allen was able to do that, but he was also able to stay healthy. He didn't really get all the big bumps and bruises that Richardson got in his first year. With the other team that I wanted to bring up on this list was the Arizona Cardinals. Their over-under right now is 7.5, most places that you look. And remember, we're not too far removed from a couple of years ago where the Cardinals started off, what was it, 7-0, 8-0, and Kyler was the front runner for MVP halfway through the season. I understand Derek Carr also had a similar thing a few years ago with the Raiders, right? Like you could lump them into the same conversation if you want to start the conversation there. However, with the addition of Marvin Harrison Jr., right, with some of the other pieces they have there offensively, I understand their defense is terrible, but maybe they could stumble into something out there, like end up around that 8-9 win mark and they're in the mix. Like, I don't think they're a team that should be discounted from here either. I don't necessarily have them as a playoff team this year, but I think they'll be much better than they were last season. Just having Kyler there for a whole year, they'll probably be around that 7-8 win range.
I don't hate that one. I think that's a decent one there. You bring in a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, who knows, what he could do for Kyler Murray, his talent level, his confidence. I think the one thing where if you're looking at Arizona, again, another pretty difficult division, I think that their chances, like you have to look and ask yourself, how good do we think the Rams will be this year? Like, does age start to catch up to Stafford? And I think if maybe an injury as well, because like it was just a couple years ago, remember Stafford was dealing with all those back problems. And he's kind of dealt with plethora of injuries over the past couple of years. Like, does injury and age kind of catch up to Stafford? And if that's the case, maybe the Rams take a step back, and that could be the slot that Arizona, fills right into in terms of the playoffs. I think the division's probably out of question. They are not going to get so much better to a degree where they can compete with San Francisco for that. But I mean, yeah, maybe a wild card for them as well. I wouldn't pick it. I wouldn't bet on it, but I do not by any means think it's the craziest pick in the world.
Now, we haven't talked about the Commanders or the Giants here. Just let's experiment with the world where either of these teams make the playoffs, right? What would that have to look like? Let's start with the Giants, because I think their chances would be better than the Commanders in both of our eyes.
Agreed. For the Giants, Daniel Jones has to stay healthy. He has to look like the 22 version of himself.
Absolutely.
That's the biggest thing right there. I think that's going to be difficult because he doesn't have as talented of a running back to dump the ball down to and kind of rely on this year with Saquon gone. So somebody's got to step up, and I think that it's going to have to be your first round pick, Malik Neighbors. Like, Neighbors has got to take off and I'm not saying he needs to break rookie receiving records, but like he's got to at least show flashes that resemble what we've seen from previous LSU receivers, guys like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. So if Neighbors bursts onto the scene, Jones stays healthy, and Jones looks like he did 2 years ago, that's the Giants recipe. And I could see it happening there where they get in, if that's the case. If all of that breaks their way, and maybe Dallas takes a step back as well, maybe I'll throw that one in there. Then maybe New York could find their way as a wild card.
Okay, I don't hate where you're going with that. I will say that.
And Tommy DeVito's mom is serving up plenty of chicken cutlets as well.
Yeah. The thing that I'm worried about is if Singletary ends up getting the workload that Saquon got too, like how soon is it before he ends up getting hurt? Right? Like, I don't think it's just Jones they have to worry about. I think I
just don't think they're going to be able to do that. I just don't think Singletary's ever taken that on.
I mean, he's been pretty consistent in terms of like what he offers for a team. It's around 200 yards receiving on the ground. He's going to mix in like around 30, 40 catches. He's going to get you like probably close to like 800 yards on the ground. He could maybe get you more if you really focus on it. The Texans threw the ball a ton last year at times, but he also had games where the Texans really like relied on him and gave him the ball a lot. And also there was time in the beginning where Dameon Pierce was their lead back. Like, he's going to be the number one guy from the get-go. I don't think he'll be a top back in the league by any means, but if he could take some of the weight off of Jones having to run the ball as much, it'll be a huge part of their offense. And like, between him and Neighbors, like those guys are going to have to get the ball a lot, I think, just to keep Jones out of danger. However that looks like with Neighbors, just get the ball out quick, get it to him, let him make some plays. Like, you don't necessarily have to take deep shots all the time, but I think there is maybe a recipe for them to be in the mix as well. Plus, like the defensive additions. I mean, Burns could be a stud, man. That could end up being a great pass rush there with him and Thibodeau too, running off either side of that line. Like, that could be really, really fantastic.
Yeah, and sometimes like there are teams. The Steelers have kind of played this way over the past couple of years, where like they rely on winning games a lot by winning the turnover battle, and when you have that can happen when you have elite pass rushers, because it allows you to be weaker in the secondary, believe it or not. Obviously, because the quarterback obviously doesn't have as much time to throw, and you've got those playmakers up front on defense that can force fumbles, force errant throws, and quicker throws than the opposing quarterback wants to make. So I agree that those guys can play a big role there too. And the last thing I'll add is don't discount the secondary options at receiver that the Giants have. I have talked about Jalen Hyatt on more than one occasion on this podcast. I like his talent.
Shout out Dutch Fork High School, man.
And where is that? In your neck of the woods?
Yeah, that's 20 minutes from where I went to high school.
Gotcha. Okay. Didn't even know that.
So I did the broadcast of his senior year state championship game where they took Dorman High School, powerhouse in the state, into overtime, and he caught the game-winning touchdown in the back corner of the end zone from a guy who ended up pitching at Clemson for 4 years. I think he's still on the team.
Damn, star-studded state championship game there, huh?
Yeah, the head coach of that team at one point had like a record for consecutive games won, I think in the nation, if I'm not mistaken. Wow. Yeah, they won 5 straight state titles.
Impressive.
Here. Yeah, it's nuts. Sorry, awesome. I didn't mean to interject with the
you're good, dude. Always good for a nice little sidebar like that. That's that's nice. And your side gig there is the I guess it's not even your side gig anymore, announcer, but I guess you get memories like that. You get to call games with big talent like that. So no, it's a good one, dude. But yeah, I was just gonna say that like he's a guy I would look for this year, and then Wan'Dale Robinson is also a guy I would not just completely overlook. Like he's gonna be another year removed from the ACL injury. This guy, like, I'm not gonna sit here and say that the Giants just have their receiving core completely solved and now it's good, but I think it will be significantly better than we've seen it over the past couple of years. I can acknowledge that.
Okay.
What Daniel Jones does with that is up to him, but I think that the Giants front office has done a pretty decent job of, all right, here's some talent, Daniel. Now you got to do something.
Okay, so I think you and I have both chosen the Patriots as the team that absolutely will not make the playoffs from this list. Who do you think absolutely will? Give me what your number one choice overall. Gun to your head, who makes it?
I'll take the Chicago Bears. Gun to my head, family's life on the line. I'll say Chicago finds a way to get in there. They won 7 games last year, and I think that they're significantly improved. I don't see Caleb. Let me say this. I don't see Caleb Williams being worse than the version of Justin Fields that we saw last year. And they add guys like Keenan Allen, DeAndre Swift. I mean, I think that they can find a way to get 10 wins.
Okay. You don't sound very confident about it.
Well, I mean, I still haven't seen Caleb Williams play yet in an NFL game, even preseason. How about you? All right, I got to put the gun up to your head now.
I would say
save your family. You got to save your family. If you're wrong, everybody dies.
Okay, what am I like? Am I Commissioner Gordon, Jim Gordon from The Dark Knight now? What are you, Harvey Dent?
You're just Patrick DeMar trying to be a humble guy and save his family here by picking the correct team that's going to have the biggest turnaround this year.
All right. Well, I'll make sure I don't die a hero here. Or maybe I want to. I don't really understand the exercise now. I'm kind of confused.
I mean, you're not going to die a hero. If you die, that means that you picked it wrong and that everybody died. So you ain't no hero in that situation.
So I want to be the villain. I would go with the Falcons. I don't really think I have to think twice about it either.
The other low-hanging fruit, yeah.
Yeah, but it's also the one that makes the most sense. It's not just a low-hanging fruit. You look at the overall situation. They have one of the best O-lines in football. They have 5 great contributors on the offense, skill position-wise. Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, say what you want about the production the last couple of years, but I guarantee you it's better this year. Darnell Mooney, Drake London, and then they also have Tyler Algier. people are talking about Bijan in this light as like a guy who could be one of the best players in the league that's a non-quarterback. And we'll kind of talk about this more later, but like he doesn't necessarily have to have 85, 80, whatever percent of the touches, excuse me. Like Algier very much could be a big part of this offense as well. People are forgetting that, but even the coaches there are talking about it. Like, go find Coach Speak Index on Twitter and tell me I'm wrong with what they're saying. That's the only other kind of nugget I'd throw in there. Like, I really do think their offense is going to be so much better. I think that their schedule just screams at least like 9 wins. Like, if they don't, then something must have gone really, really terribly wrong with whatever they did.
9 wins should be all you need in that division. Like, at least with the Bears, like the Bears will probably need to win at least 10. Because
that's what I'm saying.
You're not going to win the division in the NFC North with 10, which means that you're probably going to need to be a wild card. So maybe you could get the 7 seed with 9 if you're lucky and you got tiebreakers, but you probably need essentially 10. Falcons can win that thing at 9-8, and that could be the best record in the South.
Yeah, like that's probably the weakest division in the league. I do think the Bucs are still going to be a good team this year. I think they'll be in the mix. I think that Baker is going to continue to progress as a quarterback. I don't think last year is the best that we'll see of him. I do think he's going to keep getting better. I think Chris Godwin's going to have a great year for them as well. I think he's going to get the ball a ton. However, I think the Falcons probably have the best chances here. If I had to go with another team, I really kind of like the idea of the Cardinals from earlier sneaking in as like a 9-win team or something like that. It's a little bit of a long shot, but let's say age does catch up to Stafford. Let's say Kupp can't stay healthy. Let's say the Seahawks end up laying an egg this year. The Cardinals could end up accidentally being the second best team in the division, right? And there's so many question marks elsewhere in the league. Like maybe the NFC North beats up on each other. Like maybe the Falcons are the best team in their division at 9 wins, like you just said. And then the Commanders and the Giants suck. The Cowboys could end up with like 9 wins or less. They have a pretty tough schedule this year too. I don't think people are talking about the Cardinals enough. I think that there is a world where if Kyler is the guy that people have talked about him previously, and like if he could be the Kyler Murray, which I haven't necessarily felt that way about him prior to this year, but I'm just trying to project, man. It's part of the exercise. It's a little harebrained. It's a little tinfoil hatty. That would be the other team that I would pick if I was trying to be adventurous, I would say.
Not bad. Like I said, I think that, yeah, you kind of laid out the path that they have. It's attainable. I think if I remember correct, they had the most draft picks out of any team in the draft last year. So maybe there's a lot of young talent that still needs to develop, but it also means that you have a lot of new talent coming in there. So yeah, not a bad one there. We'll see.
They've got your boy James Conner there too.
Conner's been a solid running back. Obviously, always just can he stay healthy? But I mean, I feel like you say that on a lot of running backs. So, yeah,
I get what you're saying. Yeah, they added in Trey Benson too from Florida State, Darius Robinson from Mizzou, Marvin Harrison Jr. Obviously, it's possible they added some dudes. It's possible. We'll see. Okay, so we've got our picks there. Great exercise. We've got one more segment to tackle here, Paul, unless you have anything else you want to add with our top 8 draft picks to playoffs segment here.
All set on that. I'm ready for this final segment, man.
All right, we're going to take one more break.
Looking forward to this one, I think, the most of all.
This could be really entertaining. I'm excited for it too. We're going to take one more break. We'll come back and we'll do our last little segment here. All right, coming back from the break. Last segment. Paul, thank you, Commish, for bringing 2024 fantasy football back to us. In our league with our friends that Paul and I do, we recently did our draft order. I've heard that people do determine draft orders in some crazy ways too. Like, I think we could get more creative than you just using a number generator or like picking names out of a hat. You got to give us challenges to earn top draft spots. I don't know what that would look like. I think it's up to your discretion as commissioner, but I think that could throw a fun little wrinkle into the league that we play in.
It could. The only challenge with that is that we're like all over the country now. I mean, we went to college together, but we've all kind of gone our separate ways, and in terms of careers and where we live and everything. Like now, it's great that we still keep in touch through fantasy football, but it's tough to find something where we could do that.
What if? Hear me out. What if you next year you instruct everybody participating in the league to give you like a 90-second pitch as to why they should get the number 1 overall pick?
No. I can't do something like that.
No,
you can't, because that's completely biased. You got to have something objective. You got to either like win a contest or
okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. I was thinking about with my own prompt there. I was thinking about looking up like, I don't know, like Hulk Hogan on Cameo or something, and just telling him to tell you to pick me again. Anyways, the point is, I got the number 1 overall pick in my side of the league.
Yeah, surprised that you're coming up with an idea to change it. It worked out well for you.
I'm just trying to be creative, man. I'm all for good fun here. I don't have to pick first every year. It's cool that I get to this year, but I'm pretty sure I did once before I knew anything about fantasy football, and I think I picked either Mahomes or Lamar first overall. I don't really remember, but I remember for sure it was a quarterback at the time. This was, I think, the year after Lamar won his first MVP. I think. Maybe. I was very new to fantasy football. Don't blame me. Anyways, going into this year, with the number 1 overall pick, I would kind of feel dumb not picking Christian McCaffrey, but at the same time, I think there is an argument for other players. And that's what this conversation is about. We're going to entertain the non-CMC number 1 overall picks for my fantasy football league or for yours. It doesn't have to be me. There's other people listening to the show who are in their own fantasy leagues. Who do you think the top guy is going to be? We want to hear it. Paul, I'm going to give you a short list of guys here that kind of were in my mind. Or do you want to go one by one and kind of go through this list that you have here with some history to it first?
I'll double back with the history after you go through your list. I think that it'll partly like feed some of my argument I'm going to make. So you give me your list first.
All right. So I'm going to make a case for these guys kind of as I go. I'm going to start with CeeDee Lamb. And there's a little bit of strategy here because I think if you're picking first overall and you're picking in a snake draft, right, you could pick the best wide receiver in your mind, a guy like CeeDee Lamb or like Tyreek Hill, you could probably join these guys together, honestly. You could pick one of those guys and hypothesize that they have an incredible record-setting season. I think with Lamb, there's some contract incentive, not just for him, but also for his quarterback that could lead to some pretty inflated stats this season. And then you think about drafting at the turn in the 2nd and 3rd round, doubling back on running backs if you want, and shoring up that position as well. So it's a move that comes with a little bit of strategy to it. It's not like a direct, yes, CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill is worth the number 1 overall pick. But I think there is an argument for both those guys. I mean, depending on which leagues you look at, I'm looking at half PPR scoring right now with 6 points for quarterbacks. Lamb and Hill both had over 300 points. McCaffrey had 357, but Lamb was within 20-something points of him. Tyreek was within like 30 or 40, so they're not that far off. And if CMC ends up picking up an injury this year due to workload, you might end up wishing you picked up one of these guys. So those are the only wide receivers I have in this list, and that's kind of my argument for it. It's a 2-part equation. These guys are both really good, really talented, and we've seen them put up high-quality seasons before. But also, if you want to think about attacking your league in a different way where you make sure you get the best receiver in the league, let everybody else figure out who they're going to get, I wouldn't blame you if you took that route, depending on which position you value the most. Paul, I beg you to please tell me not to draft one of these guys or encourage me to do so. It's up to you.
I like the thought with CD and Tyreek. Actually, those are probably the 2 names that popped into my head. I mean, like the game each year becomes more and more of a passing league, and I understand that running backs are getting in on that as well with their catches. But I mean, these receivers, we're seeing it now in recent years. Absolutely, there are plenty of receivers that warrant being the number one. Justin Jefferson was the consensus number one pick coming into this past year. And, you can make an argument. I mean, he's still balled out in the weeks that he played. You can make an argument if the guy stays healthy, he might have been the number one player in fantasy. And he's a little bit further down in this list, I think, because of some of the quarterback uncertainty there. Although, according to you, Patrick, with how much you love Sam Darnold, I don't know if you consider it uncertainty. But I think that, yeah, you are absolutely justified at taking a receiver. And the biggest thing to consider, you hit the nail on the head, is, okay, if you have that number one pick, take a look at what the rankings look like coming around on the far turn when you would have your second and third round picks. And that should drive your first round pick as well. So not bad at all there. Another guy that I can't remember if you mentioned him or not. I do see him here on this list. Like, Bijan Robinson is a guy that's going pretty high. That's probably one of the guys I'm seeing in like the top half of the first round.
We talked about him earlier, but it wasn't really in this context. It was when we were talking about the Falcons in our earlier segment. Before we get to him, you mentioned Justin Jefferson in there. I did not have him on my list, and I've sort of joked about Sam Darnold, but the reason why I didn't have him on this list was because of the uncertainty at quarterback in Minnesota. Yeah. Like, they very well could say, fuck it, Jay Jettas is down there somewhere. He's getting the ball like 70% of our plays, or we're going to, that's unrealistic, but they could just kick Justin Jefferson into overdrive, say, we're going to give you the ball as many times as possible. And he very well could end up being one of the top 2 or 3 point scorers in the league this year. He's fully capable of doing that. I wanted to say one more thing about CeeDee Lamb. He was tied for second in the league behind Debo for most rushing touchdowns by a receiver last year. 4th most in rushing yards as a receiver. He actually had more yards per attempt than Debo. However, Debo had like close to 40 carries, 200 something yards. CD was 14 for 113, 2 touchdowns. He also had 2 fumbles, but you add in that like rushing side to his game as well. Like, the Cowboys running back room is a little questionable. I'm not saying like draft CeeDee Lamb as a running back, but he's got that part to his game too. He's multifaceted. Like, Tyreek Hill doesn't really do that anymore. We saw a lot more jet sweeps in his game when he was in Kansas City than we've seen in Miami.
Yeah, that's not bad. I mean, it could, hey, look, however you get fantasy points, it doesn't matter as long as you rack them up. You know what? As long as it registers on the computer, it registers, whether it's rushing, receiving, passing, whatever, man. So if they are going to give him a couple extra touches on the ground, like, I agree. That's something else to consider there as well. You mentioned Debo, it makes him dynamic. But I was going to get into Bijan Robinson. Excuse me. Apologize for yawning. Was going to get into him because I thought that he was the one guy I see on this list where I don't think he quite warrants number one yet. Like, I'd rather roll the dice back with McCaffrey. I just think that Atlanta, while they should be better, I still, by and large, don't know exactly how good they'll be with Kirk. And the offense still might be more centered on throwing the ball. You mentioned some of the weapons like London, Pitts, Mooney that they have. And, Kirk has been in a throw first offense in Minnesota, or at least the last couple of years they were. So I'm not in love with him yet. And you mentioned Algier as well. Like, he'll probably butt into carries, albeit I think less than last year. So I'm not quite there. What number one with Bijan. How about you, Patrick? Is there a guy on this list that you created, or just a guy in general who you see going in the top 5, 6? So let's just make it the top half of the first round that you're like, I don't know if I'd go that far with that guy, or I wouldn't want to take him number one.
So I think there's a conversation to be had about each one of these running backs that I have listed here. You mentioned Bijan. I sort of teased this argument beforehand. I am high on his skill level. I just think they're still phasing him in. I talked earlier about Tyler Algier. Falcons love Tyler Algier. Maybe we end up seeing a world where Bijan is unquestionably the bell cow there, and he ends up getting like CMC type targets out of the receiving game as well. I don't think that's impossible. I just don't know if it's, I mean, like, if you look at it at face value, just from the targets part of things, he actually had more targets last year than Christian McCaffrey did. He had 86 compared to McCaffrey's 83. However, he had 9 less receptions than Christian McCaffrey. So he's not as efficient actually catching the ball. However, the ability is certainly there when he has the ball in his hands. I look at a guy like Breece Hall, who also had more targets than Christian McCaffrey last year. He had 95, 76 receptions, which was more than any other running back in the league. He had close to 1,000 rushing yards, could have had more. He only had 5 rushing touchdowns. The Jets, I think I saw some stat last year where, like, I think they led the league in pass attempts within the 5-yard line last year, which, if you remember who was playing quarterback for them last year, is like the dumbest stat I've ever heard, specifically from last season. Why the fuck would you let Zach Wilson throw it more than any other quarterback in the league when you're inside the 5-yard line? Give it to your running back who's doing all this incredible stuff when he gets the ball instead. So I could see him being a guy that, if they really wanted to center their offense around him and protect Rodgers at all costs, it would look something like Breece Hall being probably the highest fantasy football point scorer in the league, or it would be damn near close. Alvin Kamara only played in 13 games last year. 87 targets, 75 receptions, 1 reception behind Breece Hall for the league lead. He had 694 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns, 300 rushing yards less than Breece, but in the same sort of ballpark overall points-wise because of those receiving numbers. If he can stay healthy for a full season, we don't know what Derek Carr is going to bring. Like, the Saints could have their questions at quarterback too. Maybe he ends up getting an inflated workload, and you could see him with like 250, 260 fantasy points, maybe even more than that. So those are the big guys that I'm really looking at. The other guy I would throw in as someone as like a wild card would be Kyren Williams. And I think about him in tandem with thinking about Todd Gurley, the year that he had the astonishing fantasy football year, and maybe in an effort to take the workload a little bit off of Kupp to keep him healthy for a full year, and to, keep Puka healthy too, and Stafford. Maybe McVay leans more into Williams and says, hey, like, you can be the guy that really sets the tone for offense. We're going to work around you, build the other parts of our game around it. Like, we know how much McVay loves to run the ball anyways. We've seen it in years past. We know how important drafting a Rams running back is when it comes to fantasy football, or having one on your roster if you can. I think there's a world where he ends up lighting the absolute world on fire this year if he can stay healthy and if the Rams have that offensive thought process. This is very much so a what if conversation. Those are my arguments for the other guys I have on here. So my sort of short list of guys besides Christian McCaffrey is CeeDee Lamb, Breece Hall, Tyreek Hill, Bijan Robinson, Kyren Williams, Alvin Kamara. Not necessarily in that order. It kind of looks like it. I would probably slot Bijan below Kyren and Kamara, and I would probably put Kamara just under Kyren, just in terms of like health. But I think they're all kind of in the same ballpark, and I think there is a legitimate argument for each of these guys. However, like, if all these guys go before CMC in a draft, your league is dumb. Like, Christian McCaffrey.
Well, they're not all gonna go before him.
Christian McCaffrey should definitely be one of the top picks in your draft, regardless of what league.
Yes. All right. You can absolutely get creative with number one, and maybe even like 2 or 3. But I mean, McCaffrey's got to go in that top echelon. You just have.
I'm curious what part of my arguments resonated with you now. Let me hear it, Commish. What you got with what I'm thinking here?
I mean, of the guys that you just mentioned, Breece Hall is the one that stands out to me. Like, I think it's completely justified if you want to go Breece Hall number one. The quarterback play was just atrocious, and this guy was still balling out last year. He was coming, off the ACL injury, and he didn't look like he missed a beat. He's going to be another year removed from that. They're not going to ease him back in like they did for the first couple weeks last year. Remember, at Dalvin Cook, they signed him late in spring training last year, and he stole a couple carries early in the year. Like, Breece Hall is one of the most talented running backs in football, period. He's young. He's exactly what you want in the position, fantasy-wise. And, like, maybe Aaron Rodgers is still good. Maybe he resembles some of what he had in the MVP-type seasons in Green Bay, but this is still a 40-year-old quarterback. Like, you can't ask him to do everything. And so Breece Hall is going to, I think, take the Jets to the next level in terms of offense. I'm not saying the Jets are going to be good. I think that, like, they are going to step up a level or two, obviously, compared to what they were last year. You can only go up. And I think that he could take your fantasy team to that spot as well. So your comments about Breece Hall and how he had some touchdowns potentially taken away from him by poor play calling in the red zone. That speaks to me as well. Like I like a guy that's somebody that I look for in terms of value and where they're going in drafts. Like some people look at just like, all right, what number of points did you have last year? Touchdowns can inflate and skew point totals. Like volume is what's key, right? And the fact that he's racking up yards and everything like that. Touchdowns sometimes aren't always a product of the player themselves. Like a lot of things have to happen on a drive for you to score. And it can be a little bit overrated sometimes when guys are just falling into the end zone. And I think it could work inversely, like where they get screwed, like a guy like Breece Hall just didn't get the opportunity as much last year. And that doesn't mean that he won't this year. So that's the big stat that stood out to me. I think now the question just begs, like, if you have the number one pick, which I know you do, Patrick, like, are you actually going to be taking somebody besides CMC? Because
I'm not going to tip my hand, but I do, like, I wanted to have the conversation, not just for me, but for other people.
Yeah, because it's pertinent because you talked about the list that I have, and I was going to break it down real quick right now. According to We Are Drafting, which is a fantasy football Instagram account, so I want to give them their shout out. I found it the other day scrolling through Instagram. They ranked, or not ranked per se, but they listed the last top 10. They called it consensus number one picks. I would classify it more as just the guys that were percentage-wise, I think, being drafted number one in the majority of leagues for the past 10 years. So if you go back all the way to, I'll just go by like worst finish to best finish because that's how they ranked them. So David Johnson was going very high, I guess, number one pick, or I know he's going very well near the top in the 2017 draft. He finished that year as the RB at 114. I think there was a big injury in there, but if you guys remember, he had a couple really good years in Arizona. He took a big step back. Everybody will remember CMC in 2020. He only played 3 games. That was his first injury-plagued season, coming off of that monster year in 2019. And he was the RB 54, only playing 3 games there. Le'Veon Bell was a high number one pick in 2015. He finishes the RB 47. He was injury-plagued in that season as well, just 6 games played. CMC doubled down in 2021. That was the year coming off of his first injury plague season, and most people threw it out the window and said this guy will resume his 2019 form. Got hurt again on multiple occasions, only 7 games, RB 38. Jonathan Taylor was the consensus, no doubt, top pick in 2022. He finished as the RB 33, playing in only 10 games that year. Justin Jefferson, if you guys remember, was the consensus number one pick. I know that plenty of people were probably still going with McCaffrey, but the majority of people were taking Justin Jefferson last year in last year's draft. He finished as the wide receiver 33, playing in 10 games. Obviously, injuries a reason for that. In 2014, it was Shady McCoy, finishes the RB12, so at least like a back-end RB1 there. Saquon was among the most drafted in 2019 at the number one slot. He played in 13 games that year, finished as an RB10. So again, back-end RB1. Of this list, these next 2 guys I'm going to mention, I would argue are the only guys that have truly lived up to a number one draft pick when they were the consensus pick in the offseason. That's Todd Gurley in 2018. Believe that was the Rams Super Bowl year when they went and lost to New England. That was back before Todd Gurley. That was pre-knee injury Todd Gurley. RB3 finished that year in 2018. He was a monster. That was a really good team that they had with Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp that year. And then Antonio Brown in 2016, he finished as the wide receiver 1. He was top 5 in the 3 major categories for receiver: catches, yards, and touchdowns. So the point I'm trying to make with this list, not to just rattle off names and numbers here, is that we see the vast majority of time, and sometimes it's not the player's fault. A lot of this is injury prone and plagued, but we see it's very rare that somebody doubles down with a number one season and like goes back to back. So the point I'm trying to make is that don't marry yourself or lock yourself in on picking Christian McCaffrey just because he had the best season last year. it very frequently flips, and especially at the running back position. A lot of those guys that I mentioned were running backs, and I mentioned the number of games they played. They're not playing full seasons. It's very difficult to stay healthy back-to-back years. So keep that in mind. Patrick, do you take anything significant from this, and does seeing this list make you think twice about taking McCaffrey or skew you to a receiver maybe? Or I guess what's your initial thoughts?
So with McCaffrey, a big part of the reason why I brought this up is, and you kind of mentioned it going through the history, is the injuries.
Oh, yeah.
From years past. You look at the first 3 years of his career, he played 16 games in 2017, 2018, and 19, back to back to back to back, right?
Mm-hmm.
He only started 10 in his first year, 2017, but then he had back-to-back full seasons starting, 16 or more games. He's at that mark with San Francisco, Carolina, and San Francisco again between 22 and 2023 now. It's a question of whether or not he can get that third consecutive year of playing a full, healthy season. How many times do we see that with running backs in general now in the NFL? Forget Christian McCaffrey, the best running back in the National Football League. Just running backs in general, right? That's kind of why I'm concerned. I still kind of lean more McCaffrey, I think, because, we've seen it the last couple of years. Last year especially, led the league in rushing yards, very much so was, as advertised, Christian McCaffrey, the guy you would hope and expect for him to be in an offense like what the Niners have. And if they're returning all of their pieces, and if he is 100% healthy for, front to back of the season, he probably is going to be that guy again. However, you still got to have the conversation, well, maybe he's not. Maybe something does happen. And I think that I do think there's a lot of merit to the argument with Breece Hall, with a guy like CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill. Bijan, I'm a little less confident in. I feel like you're trying to be more predictive in terms of drafting him, and rather than using something that you've also have proof of on the field too. He's done it in short bursts. We just haven't seen a large workload from him. And that's the biggest thing I'm concerned with Bijan. But with Williams and Kamara and those other guys that I mentioned too, I think that there's an argument there. And you could even make arguments for other guys too. We talked about Justin Jefferson a little bit. A guy we haven't talked about yet is Derrick Henry, who's moving into the Ravens offense and very well could have much different stats from what we saw with him in Tennessee last year. That maybe could be a sleeper choice for drafting at the top end of the first round if you want to make a splash and do things a little bit different as well. So, I think the door is open. I'm still kind of, me personally, I think it's more so I'm trying to just weigh the conversation in my head of, how sure am I that Christian McCaffrey is going to play 15, 16, 17 games this year? That's the biggest question in my head. Everything other than that is secondary, but is an important conversation to have also.
It's fair. It's absolutely a fair question you have to ask. And a guy that, the other thing with running backs is not that McCaffrey's old, but he's another year under his belt, more wear and tear. You've already alluded to it. I always say never draft afraid of injuries, but it has to be in the back of your mind. I think that if you're completely on the fence between say CeeDee Lamb and Christian McCaffrey, two guys that were top receiver and top running back last year, Lamb is probably the guy that is going to play more games for you. You don't get hurt as much at the receiver position. Not saying you can't, and if you're completely deadlocked on him, yeah, that should be a tiebreaker. You should take that into consideration.
You mentioned Antonio Brown, you mentioned Todd Gurley. Antonio Brown led the league in receptions 2014 and 2015. Then went into that 2016 year, you mentioned, still being number one in the league in terms of fantasy football scoring. So
he was, I don't know if he was number one overall. He was the wide receiver one that year. He was the top wide receiver in fantasy. I don't know if a running back outdid him that year, but
that's what I meant. The number one overall receiver.
Gotcha.
Gurley, what was that? 2018?
18.
You said, 18, yeah. 2017 leads the league in touchdowns. 2018 goes, right back to it. Leads the league in touchdowns again. I think if you're looking at that and just trying to look at like predicted history too with guys of our list, like there is kind of an argument for both the receivers, and there's kind of an argument for one of the running backs as well. I think the running back argument is a little less murky, but having Lamb and Hill, two guys who very easily, if they're healthy for the whole year and continue to improve or have slightly better years, those guys could end up having record-setting years where maybe they're this year's Cooper Kupp, and they end up leading the league in fantasy points as a receiver. That's like, I think the biggest tempting draw for me. However, Breece Hall is pretty, even as a New England Patriots fan, Breece Hall is pretty tempting too.
I don't blame you. Yeah, he's a good talent, man. And we'll see. Sometime, you never know what'll happen in spring training. No, dude, I'm such in
Jesus
baseball.
Christ.
I know, dude.
It's July, camp. Paul.
Dude, the Pirates, they're making moves at the trade.
Bring us 3 seasons away.
I know. I'm sorry, dude. I'm still in baseball mode. You never know what'll happen in training camp, preseason. Injuries could arise and naturally weed some guys out. Like McCaffrey could tweak an ankle and he misses 2 weeks, and all of a sudden the decision's easy for you. Or that could happen with Breece Hall. I would say stay close to the news, see how they're using them, and make sure that they're healthy going into week 1. That's about all you can do. And then I don't know, say a prayer, man, because you never know. The old adage is that you don't win your draft in the first round, but you can lose it. And kind of what goes into that saying is that, okay, you're supposed to hit on a surefire, really, really good guy in the first round. But if there's an injury or, your guy flops, you're in a world of hurt, especially if you're drafted at the very top in the first round. You got to wait a long ways until your second and third round picks, So keep that in mind.
Is there anybody that you think I missed from my short list? We also mentioned Jefferson. We also mentioned Derrick Henry. That's like a top 10, if you will, of non-quarterbacks. But is there anybody else you would throw in there that in your mind would merit consideration for that top pick?
Well, we talked about Justin Jefferson. That was the first guy that came to mind, but we already kind of touched on him. There are 2 other guys I think that I could see a path to being the number one, but just based on where I'm seeing them in mocks, they're not going to go there. Those 2 guys are Jahmyr Gibbs and Saquon Barkley.
Saquon, I think definitely is. Yeah.
Saquon, I think, is going to turn some people's head. Just way better situation in Philly now and everything like that. And
I almost put him on the list. I didn't, but I almost did.
Yeah. I mean, we saw Miles Sanders 2 years ago have the best season of his career there in Philadelphia. So I wouldn't, and Saquon, obviously a way more talented running back than Miles Sanders. So I could see a huge jump here for Saquon. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is a super talented guy. I loved what I saw out of him last year. I think the biggest concern with him would just be how much of a workload does he get? Dan Campbell likes to split time among his running backs. We saw that last year. I think that he'll have an increased workload just going from rookie to sophomore season now, but that would be the biggest thing to hold him back. But I think the talent level is there to be number one, but you got to consider situation. So I would say Saquon's probably the biggest name. Throw him in there. Great situation, great offense, great player.
Okay, cool. I can rock with that. I'm trying to the only other person I think, if I wanted to get really crazy.
We didn't talk Jamar Chase either. Jamar Chase, not a bad one.
Yeah, that's actually somebody we haven't considered at all that maybe he should get some more conversation. He's the sleeper, I guess.
Yeah, just because down year with Joe Burrow hurt last year. It's not his fault either, not his injury, but it's an indirect injury.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. All right, I kind of like how we finished there. I enjoyed our discussion. Certainly has my gears turning. I've done an incredible amount of mock drafts, and I'm gonna keep doing it because they're fun. And now I'm trying to weigh all the possibilities and options and potential picks I might have to make or not make. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, you should definitely make a pick, but
no, but you know what I mean.
I do. I'm messing with you. Yeah.
Paul, do you have any other final thoughts for today?
Nope. I think I'm all good on today. I would say, Start mocking. Never too early to do a mock draft. I think I probably said that on last week's episode as well, but do your research, see who's going where, and best of luck. Best of luck. That's all I could say. The calendar turns to August. You're probably listening to this on August. August is mock drafting month. That's what they call it. So enjoy.
That is what everybody calls August.
That's what everybody I've ever heard refers to August as mock drafting month.
Mock draft August. Mock draft
August.
Oh my gosh. Paul, my man, thank you so much again for spending time with us tonight. Fifth and Long listeners, thank you. Tune in to us on YouTube, Fifth and Long Pod. You can also find us on Twitter and on Instagram. Follow Paul and I on the socials too. We're out there if you're interested. Paul, my man, I'll see you again in 5 days. We're going to start our division previews up here soon. We got some more fantasy football to talk about. Lots of exciting content on the horizon for you Fifth and Long fans. Looking forward to it, my friends. Paul?
I'm excited. Thanks for having me, Patrick. Had a blast. Can't wait to break down the divisions in a couple of days. Go Buccos. Tough loss today, but love the moves. We made the trade deadline. Well, some of them at least. And as always, God bless.
Awesome. Good night, Fifth and Long fans. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're enjoying us. We hope you enjoy us again soon. See you later, right here on the Fifth and Long Podcast.